Welcome to the Craftsmen Online Podcast, the only 5-star rated Masonic podcast endorsed by the Grand Lodge of New York. Any opinions, thoughts, or viewpoints shared during this program are that of the individual and do not reflect the official position of any Grand Lodge, appendant, or concordant body from which that member may hail. I'm your host, Brother Michael Arce, co-founder of CraftsmenOnline.com, and you've joined us for an episode on our reading room, where we previously, on Tuesday, January 31st, 2023, had opened our reading room doors for discussion on Albert Pike's Morals and Dogma. We focus on the first chapter around the Entered Apprentice. Now, the reading room is a free program. It's offered by Craftsmen Online. You can learn more about it by visiting our website, craftsmenonline.com. Just click on the reading room page. Don't worry, I'm going to make sure to have the links up in this episode's notes. If you haven't signed up for our newsletter already, I would suggest doing so you'll get the update on when the date for the next reading room has been released, and most importantly, what the reading material will be, because we provide that as well. The co-hosts of our reading room are Right Worshipful Bill Edwards and Very Worshipful Michael LaRocco, and our special panel for the evening was Right Worshipful Walter Cook and Right Worshipful Cliff Jacobs. We're going to join them in progress as they're discussing Albert Pike's Morals and Dogma.
We picked Morals and Dogma, Entered Apprentice, because it's one of those books that everybody has seen. It's probably on many people's bookshelves, but they probably haven't read it. Or when they have tried to read it, they've read the first 2 paragraphs and said, I have no idea what he's talking about, and they close the book. So we thought that it would be an interesting discussion to focus in on the Entered Apprentice degree and to see what we could come up with as a panel of what we could take away with it. Brother Pike was active in the Scottish Rite in the 1860s, 1870s, 1880s, and he wrote Morals and Dogma in 1871 is when that comes to us. And it's been a very popular book, published and was part of many Scottish Rite Masons' libraries for many years.
Yes, Mark Isaacs, who was a panelist in our last reading room, said that he's been reading Pike's Moral and Dogmas for 20 years, and he's on page 3 right now. Right, Worshipful Bill, you were talking about how this concept of force was being discussed, and so I just want to read the passage that came out to me. It's also, again, a difficult read. The force must have a brain and a law. Then it leads to a daring produce permanent results, and there is real progress. And then there are sublime conquests. Thought is a force, and philosophy should be an energy finding its aim and its effects in the amelioration of mankind. The 2 great motives are truth and love. When all these forces are combined and guided by the intellect and regulated by the rule of right and justice of the combined and systematic movement and effort, the great revolution prepared by the ages will begin to march. The power of the deity himself is in equilibrium with his wisdom, hence only results harmony. So it's really interesting how he talked about it. Now that the subtopic again is the Entered Apprentice, how it's about forming force and how to develop it and create harmony. So that's how I'd like to start tonight's discussion.
Well, if I can jump in first. My immediate impression was it's amazing that this is what they lay at the feet of someone that has just joined the craft. The first few paragraphs are awfully heady compared to what most people would willingly encounter in today's world, even if they have an interest in looking at magazines of whatever stripe.
That's a great point, Walter. My first encounter when I was thinking about joining Masonry, people were citing that, some of the problems in Pike, the 3 times it's mentioned that he seems to glorify Lucifer. And so I don't think Pike meant for this to be given out to everybody. I think they mass produced it and gave it out to everybody. I don't think that was his intention. I don't know what his intention is, obviously, but I think that it just thought it'd be a great idea if they just gave the book out to anybody. It seems like the people who persecute Masonry read it more than Masons read it.
Masonry takes a good man and makes them better. And if this is done in conjunction, before, probably not during, or after Pike's first degree, they've barely dipped their toe into the water and they're confronted with a lot of heady ideas. He spoke at length in the chapter about the notion of politics. And I know that it's not something that we really like to discuss, but in sort of a non-partisan abstract notion, he seems to be very concerned with the passionate force that can arise not only in the individual, but in groups of people, and confronting the reader with the danger of groupthink, before that term was coined.
I think that Pike was trying to seek truth and looking at moral, religious, political, and governmental philosophy.
Mhm.
So he's taken it in a different vein than I would have. So when he was talking about force, in my reflection on it, I'm still thinking in terms of self-improvement and the idea that if you think of a laser, right, or if you're going to break off the corner of rough stones, you need very focused force for that to happen. And when I read those first few opening sentences, I was like, oh, that's where he was going with it. And then he quickly turned to making it more of a political observation about society. And that seems to be his themes throughout, versus it being what at least I typically think of it as a personal improvement of the individual.
I was a little surprised. I think back to, I believe it's the charge of the third degree, where we tell the candidate that each of the degrees has its paramount duty, and the entered apprentice duty is to God. And it seems that Pike spends little or no time discussing that relationship in terms of the entered apprentice. And I was a little puzzled as to why he brought in, the political discussion, as opposed to talking more about the relationship of the individual brother, in this case, an entered apprentice, to God. Pike is, he's interesting to read, but I think, I don't know, what kind of audience he's writing for. And I don't know that I would give this chapter to an entered apprentice to read or study upon being brought into the craft, because I think it goes far afield as to what the entered apprentice degree is really all about.
Well, he was writing for an entirely different audience. Years ago, when I was writing a paper on chambers of reflection, I looked at his treatments of the first through third degrees, and there's some real bombast there. Like you're dealing with some of the more sensational images that people think and hear about when they hear Masonry, when they're not familiar with the way that it's practiced today. So lots of skulls and skeletons, and warnings of a mortal sort against betraying your word. It was really high energy sort of experience back then. Nowadays, we can't get away with that sort of thing. We've become entirely too concerned with litigation. I don't know if that was something that he had to worry about back then, because he certainly wrote powerful rituals, but I don't think that we can get away with them today.
Also, he seemed to be very satirical about regular Masons and try to separate or delineate between Masons that get into the Scottish Rite, to get into the much more deeper. And he was, what's the term that he used? York Rite Brethren, or?
Yeah,
or...
throughout, I think there were 7 references, and I'll say it specifically, I have it marked here. We shall not repeat the explanations of the symbols given by the York Rite, or he'll say our York Rite brethren, but then he went through, and then he'll say, but a continuation of the same superficial interpretation. So he often seems to imply that he's found a deeper, truer meaning than what is in our ritual as coming from the York Rite tradition.
Which is what we practice in most of the jurisdictions in the United States.
It's interesting because I just received from the Scottish Rite Research Society a book about the 3 degrees, the symbolic degrees, as they were part of the Scottish Rite. Apparently, the York Rite and the Scottish Rite had their own versions of the first 3 degrees before they became part of Grand Lodge. We seem to have relinquished that to Grand Lodges, and the first 3 degrees are pretty uniform. But at one time, it seems like there were 2 different versions of the first 3 degrees, one tailored particularly to the York Rite, and another set tailored particularly to the Scottish Rite. And I think such as when he in this chapter, when he talks about, the York Rite of Scottish Rite, I believe that's what he's referring to.
They have their roots more in the French tradition. That I've looked at some of that, so that the degrees, when they came over, as the Scottish Rite rituals what became the Scottish Rite rituals, they came from France to Santo Domingo, and then from there up to South Carolina and so forth. There is the 10th Manhattan District, which practices a variant of this in the first degree. So some things that are in the Pike's first degree, you'll find in the 10th Manhattan District, as well as in Louisiana. There's some lodges there that practice this with some of the different flair of things. And then there's a lodge in Hawaii as well, and I believe Washington, D.C. So there's threads of it, spots of it throughout North America.
Probably the most popular or popularized version that you could see is if you see Garibaldi's first degree. If you ever come to Grand Lodge and see Garibaldi's first degree. It was actually going through the history of New York Grand Lodge and the schisms. There was a little known, it was a Supreme Council and a Grand Lodge that were connected. I'm not sure they were separate. They were called different things, but it was called the Atwood Grand Lodge or the Atwood Supreme Council. They started actually chartering some lodges. And the lodges that they chartered, they got that charter from Louisiana. The Grand Lodge in Louisiana, there's, I think, 4. One of them, Blue Lodge, is 1 through 32. They do all 32 degrees. To them, it's not separate. It's one rite. And it was interesting. So they got busted after a while for chartering lodges in not that territory. So that went away eventually. But
he put forward a ton of ideas, and I wouldn't say so much that they came across as opinion in the way that I'd be able to easily say, well, here you're correct, but I'm going to parse this apart and say yay or nay. There's a gulf of time in between when he was writing this and now. For example, just the length of sentences and paragraphs. When I was reading things from that point in time and going through grad school, my professors yelled at me because I was emulating that writing style, saying like, you have too many comma splices and you need to fix this. So I wouldn't say that I want to agree or disagree with Pike, especially success being proof. What would I be able to say to him as someone that has had such an effect on masonry throughout the world? The things that I found, and I know I mentioned this before, but I was hoping that I could get more of bounce back from the hosts and my fellow panelists, is who is the sort of Mason that he was writing it for? Because clearly he assumes that the reader has already gone through the York Rite degrees. So to echo your point from earlier, Michael, this isn't specifically for an Entered Apprentice. And also, when he's talking about the York Rite degrees and calling things, at least the symbol set, superficial, he's expecting that they have a hunger for digging deeper into something. But at the same time, he deliberately stops himself on occasion from going too deep into the Entered Apprentice degree. It seems like he wants to keep something at least as accessible as politics. What I did note, and I kept thinking about, and it seems so odd, is that almost out of nowhere, he starts talking about the 7 planets. In the immediately preceding paragraph, he starts talking about the dimensions of the lodge and has a segue sort of loose in that the dimensions of the lodge are supposed to be, as large as heaven. And then talks about the 7 planets and reaches back into the ancient past and describes that, they had planetary deities that they looked after. And this is how we ended up with days of the week. And there were steps on a ladder that ascended to heaven, which is sort of echoed with Jacob's ladder, but was also present in Mithriatic religions. So it stuck out to me because it doesn't seem to connect directly to anything else that was in this chapter. And I was trying to not go too far afield by reading ensuing chapters. So I'm wondering why he felt that an embellishment on the planets was necessary for this without digging too deeply into it. It seems like he wouldn't mention it for no reason. Because throughout Western esoterica, the planets are big, powerful ideas at the very least. But to throw them out there and then stop was very curious to me. Cliff, do you have any thoughts as to why you would do that?
I don't know why he went down that particular road. I'm hard pressed to come up with a reason for that, except for maybe the significance of the number 7 in a lot of what we do. You know, he mentioned the Jacob's ladder, and that, while we have 3 rungs of faith, hope, and charity, if you add the prudence, fortitude, justice, and so forth, then you get up to 7. But and then, I know, I'm not sure if Pike said this, but sometimes Jacob's ladder has 72 rungs. And that gets into something else, like the Shem Ham Foresh.
Right.
72 names of God. So I thought maybe he was just leaving breadcrumbs for the reader to follow, to kind of go deeper on one's own. Other than that, I can't really say. I think he's, he might be a little bit of the trickster in his writing as well.
Well, that's what I was wondering about, because I think right before he mentions the planets, he discusses the lesser light. So I'm going to skirt around the topic to not, quote something from the ritual. But there are 2 planets that we discuss in even the Entered Apprentice degree. And there's a third lesser light that seems to be sort of the earthly representative of that. So the question would be then, the notion of light, as we speak about it Masonically, as being sort of a insight, understanding, or interior illumination, but balanced against the notion of physical light as seen in the sky. So, I mean, I suppose that, there may be an element of the trickster. I saw someone in chat saying that it was a teaser. That could be.
I get that impression of Pike too. I always wonder, there are certain things, especially when it comes to how it's played out in some of the southern jurisdictions degrees of the Scottish Rite. I always wondered where there was a few things that he got wrong, yet he had to teach himself Sanskrit in order to read the Bhagavad Gita. So there's a couple of things he got wrong, but I mean, we take for granted what he had to go through to find this information, decipher it, and really discover the teachings of other religions. And I always wondered that some of the things that he got wrong, or I dare say maybe changed from the original Franken manuscript to his degrees, is it that he just made a mistake because he was trying to fill in the gaps? Did he intentionally create a ruse for brothers to catch the mistakes and then go back and do their own research and have their own discovery? I kind of want to romanticize him and say it's the latter, that he's kind of like, maybe like what you and Cliff was saying, that he's kind of like, this is creating like a whole bunch of fuzzy information, and that you have to be worthy enough to go deeper. And
there may be a third option, though. It may be something like lust of result. So in the book of Numbers, I think that he, I don't know if authored would be the right term, but sort of condensed, he puts forward a explanation for a part of the 3rd degree being revealed in the famous Aum. Like, you can't go to a yoga class today without having, like, my 5-year-old literally was taught to, say Aum as a way of calming herself at the beginning and the end of doing yoga. And that ended up being specious. And at the introduction of the book, it says that, well, historically, we can't say that this was even in mind of the designers of the ritual. So we have to disavow his conclusion here. Nevertheless, it stays in the book. So I think that he might be an individual that had so many bolts of lightning, inspiration going on through his Masonic experience, and was able to connect a lot of dots. But sometimes he may have let the idea of what has come across to him escape him. Sometimes we call this personal and verified gnosis, which is something deeply meaningful to the individual, but isn't always translatable to the next brother.
And then he'll say something like profound, like there was this one part that I highlighted. Though masonry neither usurps the place of nor apes religion, prayer is an essential part of our ceremonies. It is the aspiration of the soul towards the absolute and infinite intelligence, which is the one supreme deity, most feebly and misunderstandably characterized as an architect. Certain faculties of man are directed towards the unknown, thought, meditation, prayer. The unknown is an ocean, of which conscience is the compass. Thought, meditation, prayer are the great mysteries pointing of the needle. It is a spiritual magnetism that thus connects the human soul with the deity. These majestic iridations of the soul pierce through the shadow toward the light.
So evocative, isn't it?
Indeed.
And Brother Michael, from our conversation, I did look up what apes means in that context, and it probably means imitate. So it'd be that masonry doesn't imitate or usurp a religion, but then it has this lofty purpose. So that's how I would interpret that.
That totally makes sense.
Yeah, I had a note here about that passage that you quoted, Michael, and that I really appreciate Pike's approach to the unknown, because we are all finite beings, and the totality of the universe, which is truth, is unknowable to us. We are just not capable of grasping it. The idea of Laplace's demon, where, you know, even if we could memorize the position and velocity of every particle in the universe, you know, we still wouldn't be able to do much with that beyond a few, you know, lengths of time, even in a human lifetime, because we wouldn't be able to process, even if we had that chunk of information, what it would all mean. You know, irrespective of physics like Brownian motion, but the choices that people make and the movements that go through society or an individual, like he talks about earlier in the chapter about force, there are things that move through people that seem to come from deep within them, that in some ways we can sort of control, at least have self-control, but in other ways we kind of have to surf a wave. I think that we've all been feeling this since, you know, politics started to heat up, you know, less than 10 years ago. So yeah, the notion of unknown keeps us humble, and reminds us that, you know, even calling deity an architect is, you know, not altogether accurate. So the humility in that spoke to me.
Did anyone catch where the part where he almost is like saying, of course he takes like, you know, 50 times more words to say something than the average person, but it's almost like there's this one part where he's saying that prayer actually can control the forces of nature with the will, with free will. Did anybody catch that part of it?
Within the subject of masonry and religion, I think what he's talking about, the power of prayer and the appeal of the deeper parts of the human entity to reach out beyond its physical capacities to affect that force. And I'm not trying to go into a George Lucas direction. You know, he does say that thought and emotion are forces to contend with, and they're not impotent just because they're not physical. The means by which they can affect the world is unknown to us now, because we're so used to a controlled environment with one variable being changeable. And as soon as you step into the realm of psychology, that becomes impossible. You know, like, are you stressed today? Do you have something else on your mind that's distracting you? Do you have something that's unconscious that is affecting you in a way that you don't know? He gets real close to writing The Secret there, that has entered and exited pop culture already. I would say that esoteric practice that he's kind of hinting at It says, there are means by which that thought and emotion can affect the physical world, but it's not as easy as just writing down a vision board.
Can't call myself a fan, nor am I a critic of Albert Pike, and we noted so many of the problems with reading him. But then he comes up with this line. He says, "To deny the efficacy of prayer is to deny that of faith, love, and effort. Yet the effects produced when our hand, moved by our will, launches a pebble into the ocean, never cease, and every uttered word is registered for eternity upon the invisible air." Wow.
Yeah.
That's profound.
I happen to agree with him on that point. I think prayer is very efficacious. And the power of prayer is the way of the mystic, as opposed to, say, the way of a practical magician. A lot of prayers have their own sort of egregor that have been built up over years, like the Lord's Prayer, for example. And they can be and are very, very powerful. I think Pike got that one right, actually. And I agree with him totally on that point.
And it reminds me of the notion of something like apostolic succession too, because think about what we do when we are going through our ceremonies, when we induct someone into the fraternity. There's one of my books that calls it something like spiritual cooties, where you can only be made a Mason by another Mason. You can't do it on your own. Even if you were to fashion all of the furniture in the lodge perfectly, the experience of it is to be in a temple with a lodge of brothers inside the temple welcoming you into the fraternity. And that is accomplished by the same means as, prayer and faith. It's there's thought and emotion and a sort of poetic sort of vamping up of the personality. We open ourselves to something greater at those moments in time.
Yeah, that's powerful. I was taking a good friend of mine through the proficiency, right, from first degree to second degree. And when he looked at the book, he was like, "Oh, this is like Hebrew." I was like, "What do you mean?" He goes, "Well, when you learn Hebrew, you need a rabbi to tell you what the words are. Someone has to tell you that MR period means Mr. or DRD means doctor. You'll never guess it. You'll never know." And so the ritual itself needs another person to fill in the gaps. And so I guess it gets to where we started with the first degree, with the scripture lesson. Oh, how good and pleasant it is for brethren to dwell in unity, and the whole lecture of the tools. How it ends with the common gavel, and how that whole speech ends is profound.
Mm. Yeah, my experience of the first degree was literally life-changing. I joined the fraternity expecting that it was going to be just a cool little thing that I could do to plug myself into something that my father and my grandfather had done. And even after meditating for 10 years and change, I was floored by the power and the sublime technique that goes into the ritual. And that's regardless of whether or not the people performing it appreciate what it is that they're doing. Like what Masonry has is nothing less than the most powerful and profound technology for human transformation I've ever seen. Like every fraternal organization that I know of, even the one that my wife's belonged to, like a fraternal order of pharmacists, they stole from us.
and yet, my first degree, my first experience, the master stuttered. I didn't understand a word he said. So thank God that I was able to go back and see first degrees after that over and over, and then confer it myself and be part of it myself. And sometimes you get it when you first receive it, and even if you get a crappy display of it, there's still hope. There's definitely still hope.
And Brother Walter, you mentioned something. You used an interesting phrase. I think you mentioned apostolic succession. And, I think that's something that sometimes in Masonry, we don't understand or we miss, because it is a transmission. You are transmitting something to the candidate that has a long history. And when the master or whoever is conferring the degree understands that, I think the moment can be very intense for the one who is actually receiving the degree. It's a succession. It's a transmission that has a long history, and if done right, can be it can be a life-changing experience.
This has been the Craftsmen Online podcast. If you've enjoyed this inside look of the Craftsmen Online Reading Room, make sure to visit us online, craftsmenonline.com, and visit the Reading Room page for details on our next event. You can also hear more of our podcast by telling Alexa or Siri to play the Craftsmen Online podcast. We're available on all streaming platforms with new episodes every Monday morning. Until next time, let peace and harmony prevail.